This is part 2 of my journey with having a baby, my now 8-year-old Violet. I'm just recording this straight off the back of the first one. So there's part 1, which is my preconception journey. That's worth listening to before you roll into this, because I talked a little bit about the pregnancy journey there. Today I'm talking about, or right now in this episode, I'm talking about my pregnancy journey with Violet. And then part 3 will be her birth, the painless birth and the lotus birth that I experienced. So I think I ended part 1 with, I'd already been traveling South America, skiing in France and Switzerland, which was pretty cool, eating raw cheese, and then coming back to a job in Tasmania, which was a 6-month locum. And they didn't know I was pregnant. I did plan on telling them, and I think I told them at around 9 weeks. And actually, this is interesting. So there is this thing where people often don't share whether or not they're pregnant to the bigger, wider world outside of their partner or maybe family until they're 12 weeks pregnant. Now, I'd love for you, if you were pregnant or considering this, to really question yourself as to, are you just following the masses and that you don't share this because everyone else doesn't share and it's normal to do it after 12 weeks? Or do you want to share it earlier? Do you want to keep it to yourself for 5, 6, 7, or 8 months? You know, what is it that you really want to do? So I'm now remembering, actually, we came back from overseas and we flew in the day of my friend's wedding, Bridget and Chris's wedding. And oh gosh, yeah, that was a whole thing. Their wedding venue burnt down a year prior. And then I think it was rebuilt, or they had to move locations. Anyway, I'm just recalling this as I'm speaking. So Bridget and Chris, they got married and we were due to fly back the day of the wedding. And oh my gosh, it was so incredibly jet lagged, but we made it. And I told my friends on the dance floor that I was 6 weeks pregnant. So, yeah, that was really cool. So I decided to tell my friends at 6 weeks. I think I had already told my parents as well. And it was that whole thing, oh, I've got something to tell you. And I never say that. So of course they're like, you're pregnant. So that was super cool. I do have a sister, she's older. And so I was the first one to have a baby in our family. And then what happened? Yeah, then I found myself in Tassie and I was working as an osteopath doing a locum job. I think I had done this locum before and I really enjoyed it. And this was a clinic where I would see about 50 to 60 clients a week, but I loved my osteo work back then. So now I'm not so connected with it, but I loved it back then. If you were a patient and you're listening to this, message me, by the way, because I always like to hear where you're at if you're listening to this. So, yeah, I told them at 9 weeks that I was pregnant. And what's really interesting is that I say that pregnancy is a positive physiological stress. And of course, it is either positive or negative on the emotional level, depending on how you feel about the pregnancy, the relationship you're in, whether it was planned or unplanned. But hormones do change. And I felt really good during pregnancy. I felt my moods were good. I'm usually a pretty emotionally stable person. But what was interesting is at 9 weeks, I remember I'd walked 20 minutes to work and I felt like I had cold water dripping down my leg. And I would just get this ache in my left butt and my left quad. And thankfully, seeing osteos, I worked out I had a condition, musculoskeletal condition that was common in pregnancy called, oh my gosh, it was a femoral nerve impingement, meralgia parasthetica, came in my brain and left. Meralgia parasthetica is a femoral nerve impingement. Now, most people think when a nerve is impinged, it's incredibly painful, and it can be the case for this. However, I was experiencing numbness on my quad and a low-grade nervy ache and odd sensation. Nerves govern sensation. And so my sense of touch was altered on that leg, and I felt like I had cold water dripping down my leg. So what's interesting about this is that pregnancy is a stress on the body. And just like hormones, if you've got out of whack hormones, it's going to exacerbate what's already a weakness. So I don't think I've ever done a podcast about this, maybe not. But when I was 16, I had plantar fasciitis really severely, and I've never been overweight. And meralgia parasthetica will usually happen in the 3rd trimester when you put weight on. I hadn't put any weight on at 9 weeks, and I would consider myself fit and healthy at that point in time. So I had plantar fasciitis when I was 16, really badly, orthotics, etc. And then it kind of went away. And when I was at osteo school between the ages of 18 to 22, 23, is all these osteos would look at me and tell me how my left sacroiliac joint in my pelvis was hypermobile or loose. So, and I never felt any pain from it. And that's the thing, is like sometimes we don't learn until we have pain. And I believe actually, so remember I'm just accessing this from memory, which is why I really need to document this, is that prior to getting pregnant in my mid-20s, I did have a lot of SIJ pain. I'd get that stabbing like someone was sticking a knife in the back of my pelvis. I'd sometimes drop to my knees in the middle of the street because it's like I'd get this stab. I'd have the ache around my bum. And of course, it felt really good when my SI joint was cracked or someone massaged my bum, but it was never long lasting. And I often joke that I'd love to do a whole course on sacroiliac joint down to the physical, because it is a condition that gets overtreated, and it's very common in pregnancy, but it's usually pre-existing as well, is that it's overtreated and under-rehabilitated properly. So, yeah, this being told when I was younger that I had a hypermobile SIJ, it didn't manifest until I was in my mid-20s, and I had to learn from the pain. And I remember always just feeling a little bit gammy, and I actually think it was this left SI joint that's always been an issue, and I don't know where it roots from. Sorry, I have gone into the emotional aspect for sure, and led to me getting plantar fasciitis because it internally rotated my whole lower limb and flattened my foot. So physical was affecting that, and then affecting emotional and vice versa. So yeah, actually all of these things probably stack back 10 years prior to me actually having issues. So then I had done quite a bit of work around my SI joint, been very conscious about my posture and taking the slow steps to rehabbing. I think it took me about a year to get to a good place with my SI where it wouldn't flare up and it wouldn't ache or be annoying. I do remember going to my very first Vipassana course in Melbourne back in 2012 and standing up from one of the meditation sessions and feeling my left SI release, crack, and feeling like everything fell into place like dominoes down my left leg. It was amazing. And I've heard lots of stories when I talk to people after the Vipassana course of how they went to the chiropractor for chronic headaches, and then they get up from a Vipassana meditation sit session and their middle back cracks, and then everything just kind of falls into place. So yeah, Vipassana can be very healing on a musculoskeletal physical level as well as many other aspects. So yeah, having this positive physical stress, and yes, ligaments get a little bit softer, is that it exposed this weakness that I had in my left sacroiliac joint. And that's why I think I got the meralgia parasthetica, and that's why I think my femoral nerve was compromised, probably because things were a little bit floppy and it just tipped it over the edge to be stretched or compressed in a certain way. So it felt really awesome having someone massage my glutes, massage my leg, but it wasn't the answer. And this was it was the Body Focus studio in Launceston. They're amazing people, Lizzie and Marshall and Haley. And they had a Pilates studio. And I think it was Lizzie that took me through some Pilates, and I really learned the next level of activating my glutes to stabilize my pelvis so that it would feel better. So before I did walks, I had certain exercises to do, and I would have to check in with my glutes to make sure they were activating. And I had to be a little bit more conscious about it because I had this additional pregnancy hormonal stress on my body, even though it wasn't mentally stressful. I want to get that clear. But I do think Pilates is an amazing modality, amazing exercise to do, especially on a reformer with someone experienced to help you. And it can be very remedial when you're in pain. There are so many women during pregnancy who just think it is normal to be uncomfortable and in pain, not just around the pelvis, but the lower back, and to have heartburn. Is that I just want to cut that now, is that I believe that you can be comfortable in any state. And you don't have to live with things. And there are so many services and modalities out there. And that's why I wish, people could talk about things more so people can be aware of what can help them. So Pilates really helped me. Yes, having some hands-on work. And sometimes I'll be like, can you just stick needles in my bum? Can you just massage it? I just want to feel better. I don't want to do the work right now. But underlying, I knew that I had to do the rehab exercises. So why I'm sharing that is that, yeah, I had to learn from experience. I had to learn from pain that I had an issue. It wasn't good enough that when I was 18 to 23 that all the bloody osteos were telling me that I had a loose and hypermobile SI. I was in the space, my masculine brain, that I have to feel it because I don't believe you. But I believe them now, if ever you worked on me, that many years later, I did have that issue with my SI joint and I didn't do the preventative work. So I had meralgia parasthetica, and I got through with it fine, and it was never painful. My key message I want to get across with that is you do not need to be in pain. I used to have this kind of timeline set out that I would give my clients, is that you can get treatment before 12 weeks. It's just more the practitioner that you see whether or not they're comfortable seeing you before that. I'm not going to get into that because that's like a whole other podcast episode. But I feel like if you've got pre-existing issues, they're either going to come up in the first trimester or 22 weeks. If you're going to get issues, they're definitely going to come up around 22 weeks. That's the pattern that I sort of noticed. Usually, not always, but usually if you're fine by 22 weeks, you're going to be fine. And it's nice just to have your body moved and assisted as you are transitioning and your body is changing and adapting to the changes of pregnancy. So this is the time where I was trying to find a midwife, and I'm pretty sure that, I was still traveling between Australia and New Zealand, and everyone talks about how the New Zealand healthcare midwifery birthing system is really awesome. But I think there's another side to it that you see when you actually live and work with clients and experience it here. I won't get into the politics of it, but yes, you can have a home birth for free in New Zealand. In Australia, you've got to pay for an independent midwife. And again, I want to share this because I like to take money out of the equation. I know it's not possible for everyone, but I like to take money out of the equation when I'm making decisions. So we were in Tekapo and I emailed pretty much every single midwife. I found out who were the good ones, who might support me, and I never heard anything back from those emails. I personally don't like working with people who are too busy. I know that's something that we can't always avoid in every industry, but I was like, that's my sign. If they can't get back to me. Now, the other reason they might not have gotten back to me is because I'm really blunt with my communication. And I said, this is what I want. I want to have a home birth. I want to have a lotus birth, and I don't want to have a lot of intervention. But let's meet so we can talk about this. Never got to that point of meeting them and having the conversation. So Gav is Irish and he was a mountain guide, and he was on visas, meaning he had to work for other people. He was also expected to be away, like in the mountains, at least 2 weeks out of the whole month. That might be split up trips, but he would be gone for there was an expectation of up to 14 days out of a month. Pay's not great when you're working for someone else. And I'm Australian living in New Zealand. So this isn't really working. Midwives aren't getting back to me to have a baby in Tekapo. And you don't really want to be away from home when the baby arrives 2 weeks out of every month. I don't want that as well. We wanted to be attachment parents. We wanted to be there for Violet and set ourselves up to allow that space and time. So we decided that we would go back to Australia to have Violet. So we still were in New Zealand and I was doing locums. We didn't plan to go back right until before the birth. So we actually went back when I was 35 weeks, I think it was. And the benefit of that was we were married at the time and Gav could get Australian residency, being married to me. He could get better paid work. He was doing high ropes access, window cleaning, skyscrapers, city buildings in Melbourne. And he could come home each night. And in the meantime, he could get residency in Australia, which meant if we ever decided that we didn't want to live in New Zealand, we could both go back to Australia and work. But we could both work in New Zealand and he could work for himself. So again, you can kind of see like how we started planning, because this is back in 2014. We started planning for what was going to happen in 2016 way back. And I think too many of us just fight the fires and only think a week ahead. So that was cool. And we decided to go back to Australia, which we knew instantly that we were up for about anywhere between $3,000 on the cheap side, to 5, 7, 10 grand to have a independent home birth midwife. And started searching, started joining some Facebook communities and getting hold of a couple of names. And I think I emailed about 3 midwives. And I got a response back from 2, and I had a phone chat to both of them. And I often preface when I'm talking to pre-frame when I'm talking to people is like, look, this is who I am. I'm not getting you to judge me by my title, but I know what I want. And I want to know what I'm looking for is someone that can support me and work with me. I will make informed choices, but ultimately I want to be supported with the choices I make. I know that things can go wrong and I am willing to take that responsibility. However, I know that for like having been a practitioner and, for midwives, and this is another story, is that ultimately and unfortunately people, when things go wrong, it becomes the responsibility of the practitioner, even if I didn't want it to be the responsibility of the practitioner, is that is a tough position that a lot of registered practitioners are in, is that sometimes they feel forced to make decisions based on if things go wrong, my life and my career is on the line. Another topic. Anyway, so I would say I want a home birth, I want a lotus birth, I don't want intervention, I don't want to be tested all the time, I don't want to have the blood tests, I don't want the glucose monitoring, I don't want to have scans. And during the birth, I really don't want you touching, or I don't want a fetal heart rate monitor on me. So I also expressed this to my parents. My dad was a sonographer. He's now retired. He used to do x-rays as well. So a sonographer is someone who does the ultrasounds on babies. And my mum used to be a midwife, but she was like a rehab and day theatre nurse by this time. And when I share this with them, is the instant reaction is like, why would you do that? That's not safe, blah, blah, blah. But this is why it's important to plant the seed and talk about things early so that you can have conversations. Now, I am the kind of person that's like, I'm just going to do this anyway. We had agreed that we wanted a home birth and they were okay with us having it in their home. If they didn't agree to this kind of stuff, we would have been very willing to find another location to have this baby. So I wouldn't have been up for, well, if you're going to have the baby in this house, this is the way you have to do it. I know, from experience of working with a lot of pregnant women having babies, and what I really love to support women with is to have the birth that you want and that you don't do it any other way for any other person other than yourself. So at first they're like, oh, what if something's wrong with the baby? You know, everyone's mind goes to, what if something's wrong? It's like, well, what if this baby's completely healthy? Now, I do acknowledge I was 29 and I was healthy. Yes, anything could happen. I had that going through my mind. So then we gave it a couple of days and we'd have conversations, and my dad came round to it and he said, oh, well, you know, you're young, you're healthy, you're low risk, so I don't see any issue with that. My mum just eventually came around to it, which was great, but it was really nice to have their support. I think that sometimes you can go either way. If you're a practitioner that's seen all the things that can go wrong, you are exposed to a lot of things that can go wrong. And yes, there are pros to having scans, but I think one of my big reasons why I didn't want it is I have seen so many pregnant women be told that something's wrong with their baby. And, oh, you got to wait 4 weeks until the next scan. You got to wait until the anatomy scan. You got to wait until this. And the stress that they're under is huge. And I believe that stress can affect the baby unless you have learned how to navigate and process your emotions, because it's not about being stress-free. We want to be able to manage stress, cope with stress, not bypass stress and just store it in the body. I just clearly remember being told a story about a lady who had twins and was having to travel all the time to have scans and being told to abort one baby because of twin-to-twin syndrome and that it wouldn't survive. And then she went on to have healthy twins. Like, I've heard so many stories of this, of being told that your baby's got something wrong and then it actually comes out healthy, and then you've spent 7 out of 9 or 10 months worrying, and who knows what goes on in your head. I mean, I've heard some things that go on in people's heads. It's crazy. So I just didn't want that. And as I said in my first part 1 of this podcast about Violet's birth, preconception, pregnancy and birth, is that I was willing to accept whatever we were gifted, whatever nature had provided, whatever lesson it was to provide. And again, knowing that, yes, things could have been missed. So I don't think a lot of people know that you don't have to have ultrasounds if you don't choose to. But again, you got to take into account what's your health like, your peace of mind around it, etc. And talk this out with your partner, your family, whoever's going to be supporting you. And of course, finding support midwives, doulas who support that vision for you as well. But please just don't go in ignorant. What I really don't like seeing is when people blame. And that's that hard responsibility that I think practitioners have, is that ultimately this is going to come back on them. And there is a lot when things go wrong, the human, your family wants to blame someone else for something going wrong, because this couldn't possibly happen for any other reason, right? Tough thing. So yeah, and this is a period of time where I was verbal and vocal. If people ask, like, what are you going to do? And people, like, most people were genuinely curious as to why I was doing these things. Now, there are some people who make decisions and they're ready to fight it. But I could see the people who were curious and where I would like happily share for inspiration and ideas and like letting people know that there was another way. And then there were some people where I was like, you've got no idea. And you just want to project your pain, all of your negative stories. So sometimes I would ask them, it's like, well, what part do you want to know? Do you want to know the short version or do you want to know the long version? And sometimes I wouldn't be prepared to engage in the conversation unless they were prepared to listen to the long version. I would also, as soon as someone started telling me all their pain stories and the things that got missed because they were trying to warn me, I'd say, look, I've done my research. I know that things can go wrong, but I don't need to hear this right now. Keep it to yourself. Yeah, I did shut some people down because it's like, hang on, why are you telling me all the bad things when right now I'm trying to focus on the good things that can happen? I'm not ignorant to things going wrong. I guess I'll talk about some books that I really loved. Rhea Dempsey's, I hope I'm getting this right, but it's called Birth with Confidence. And sorry if that is the wrong author, but it's called Birth with Confidence. And I think it is really good because it talks about the few different personality types and how you're likely to respond in pregnancy, in labor, in the birth process, like those who are likely to ask for medications, etc. I also loved reading Lotus Birth, which was some really positive accounts of the lotus birth and people's different experiences. And I think I'll talk about this in part 3, why I decided to have a lotus birth leading into the actual birth. What were some other books? Sarah J. Buckley, she's a GP in Australia, and her book is called Gentle Birth, Gentle Mothering. I also loved Murray Mongan's Hypnobirthing. And for a lot of my clients when I was in osteo, I would highly recommend they did hypnobirthing. I didn't actually do the course. I was very rooted in my Vipassana practice, and this is where I learned that pain is sensation and highly emotionally driven. Pain is highly emotionally driven, but I learned that pain is sensation. But Murray Mongan's story was really inspiring, from like trusting that the female body can birth a certain way. And it took her 4 babies to have the birth that she really wanted and knew that she could have, and not being forced to have it a different way. What other books? I think that, and Ina May Gaskin, any of her books are just so beautiful. I really wanted to infuse in positive experiences. I would watch YouTube videos of people having like positive home birth experiences. And every time the baby would come out, I'd like find myself in tears. It's like this big release. And Michelle O'Dent, a male obstetrician, Michelle, Michel, a little bit challenging to understand. I think we were watching DVDs we borrowed from our midwife, but talking about the environment around for the birthing mother. So I'll go into that more in part 3. Where am I in this pregnancy journey? Yeah, so no interventions, no blood tests, etc. But of course, if I didn't feel great, I would do that. And I must admit, I did go to the GP once because I wanted to try and get the $500 Medicare rebate by having a GP approve that I could have a baby at home. Now, I had no relationship with the GP, and I went down the road to this bulk billing GP in Eltham, and she said, no, I'm not going to sign off on that. And I was like, fuck, what? Oh, sorry. Why did I subject myself to this experience? My whole pregnancy experience has been positive. And why did I do this for $500? And I think I might have like closed the door quite firmly when I walked out. Yeah. And actually, she just filled my mind. I can't even remember it anymore, thank goodness, but filled my mind of all the things that could go wrong and why I shouldn't have a home birth and why it was unsafe, etc. It's like, oh God. So I found an amazing midwife. Haven't come to that. I found an amazing midwife. She was a fresh midwife. She was an ICU nurse. I'm going to mention her name, Martina Gorner. She is no longer a midwife, which I think is a real shame. She's following her path. She is now, I believe, a doula. Martina, I would really love to get her on the podcast. But she was just amazing. She didn't have kids, but I knew there was something in her that was very connected. German, and, you know, in Germany, I think they're quite pro-natural birth, homeopathy, all these sort of things. So she was very willing to, because I was going to be traveling a lot between Australia and New Zealand and working in Tasmania for a decent amount of time. She was willing to not do the regular amount of prenatal appointments. I think I saw her about a total of 4 times. I was just very independent. And I know not everyone's like this. I said I would monitor my own blood pressure because I had that capability. And she was on board to not intervene during the birth. We came to a compromise, which is why I picked her. I just liked her energy. I laid it all out and she could handle who I was and how I delivered my information. Gav liked her. But at the end of the day, she was willing to do less fetal monitoring than the other midwife. The other midwife was like, no, you need to have it at least every 15 minutes. And I think she compromised. And I had the fetal heart rate monitor, or just like the proby thing on my belly once during birth from my memory. It's like, great. Yeah, so we picked her, barely saw her maybe 4 times and only a handful of times afterwards, but we felt really good in ourselves. And I just want to say that I feel like we did a lot of preparation. We did a lot of planning. We were very intentional with how we wanted to do things. And first and foremost, it was going to serve me and it was going to serve Gav and the way we wanted to do things. And then we communicated it and made sure that our support team, our family and everything were on board with that. And if they had any questions and they were asked in a nice way and a place of curiosity, then we would explain and share to educate them, because we had been doing all this background research and we didn't expect them to do it. During the pregnancy, I did get my mum to watch some videos around why we're choosing to do some things, and I'm very appreciative that she actually took the time to watch these things. And what else during pregnancy? All of a sudden I get on a roll and I'm like, actually, I think this is the end of the story and we're on to part 3. Oh, so I did rock climb during the pregnancy, and I remember a friend telling me, just be really careful of it. She remembers a friend of hers doing a grade 15, which isn't very hard, wasn't an overhang, but just got that diastasis, which is really common, the separation in the abdominal muscles, but she kind of like herniated the whole thing. And I was like, oh gosh. And I was rock climbing in Tassie. I remember trying to follow Gav up at 24 on a top rope. And I remember pulling down a little bit too hard, and I did feel something in my belly button kind of pop. And I do have a tiny, tiny hernia, but it doesn't give me issues. But I was like, oh, why didn't I listen? So I actually stopped climbing after that, I think, and preserved the rest of my belly button. I hope I remember to talk about diastasis, because I did have it for about 18 months and it did heal, which most people would say it won't heal unless it's healed after 6 months. So I continued to rock climb, and then 29 weeks is actually when I decided to stop work, because I was very much in the traveling kind of mode. And we decided to go and revisit New Zealand, go skiing during the winter. And yeah, I just skied. And I remember a lady in Tassie, and I was telling her, oh yeah, I'm going back to New Zealand skiing. She's like, be careful you don't get a placental abruption. I'm like, thanks for that. Yes, there's a risk, I know, but I want to do this. I was still going to the sauna. There was a point, because I was using public saunas, where I stopped, because I'm like, I just don't want to deal with people's comments anymore. And I talked to a few European friends who were like, yeah, we just went in saunas the whole time. Like the Finnish go in saunas all the time. Whether they change the temperatures, I'm not too sure. But this was stuff I was trying to research, and I just had to make my own decision. I think the key is not to stress the body beyond what it's actually capable of. And yes, extreme heat, if you're not used to it, just like emotional work, if you're not used to it prior to pregnancy, then it can be very stressful. I did go to the spas. Yes, I know there's risk of bacteria. People would always come up, really nice, just to warn me, did you know? So I kind of stopped these things. I swam throughout the pregnancy. I did my Pilates. I went skiing. And I think we were in New Zealand for about 4 weeks. And that was really fun. I realized when I finished work at 29 weeks how much I slept. So I wouldn't say that I was tired or exhausted throughout the pregnancy at all. But it's that whole thing of like, sometimes you don't realize, regardless of pregnancy, how tired your body and brain can be. So I slept a lot. And I know that it's not the luxury that everyone can have. I would say that this is a stage when Gav and I were earning money, and then I would burn it. He's more frugal with his money, but we didn't have a stockpile of money by any means, but also we were setting ourselves up for me to have 12 months off. And Gav ended up having 6 months off during the pregnancy, which was longer than intended. And that did cause some tension. So, we kind of just had enough. But I made that decision of like, I'm going to finish working at 29 weeks. I'm not going to finish at 36 weeks. What if my baby comes early? And I always knew that she was going to come at 38 weeks. She came at 38 weeks in one day. So, I was like, the more space and time. And again, I think I said at the start of this is tune into whether or not you're sharing at the 12-week mark because you think that's what you're meant to do and you're just following the masses, or is it what you want to do? Same as, do you finish work at 36 weeks because that's what you have to do, that's what you think you want to do? If you've got the flexibility and availability to finish earlier and you want to, then go for it. I do believe, like a lot of the people that I would see with overdue, they're going to come when they're meant to, but this can play on people's minds. Once you're over 40 weeks, oh my gosh, I'm going to have a big baby, whatever. It's not true necessarily. But the amount of people I see try and move house, build a new house, renovate when they're due, and the baby doesn't come until the renovations are done. I think if you can give yourself more space and time to process things, the better. It's a little bit like hypnobirthing. I would say start at 20 weeks, start at late 20 weeks. Don't leave it until the last minute. You know, practices take time to integrate. I really credit Vipassana, but I didn't start Vipassana 2 weeks before I had a baby. I started it 2 years before I had a baby and understood the concepts, embodied them, practiced them, so that when the stress was higher, I could call on these things. Because when you're stressed, if you don't have ingrained habits, you've got no hope of calling on them. All right. So, yeah, then I went skiing. I didn't look pregnant until I was about 29 weeks. And then I was in winter clothes, so you couldn't really tell either. I do a little bit of climbing, alpine stuff with Gav, nothing too intense, but always, you know, listening to my body and what I was capable of. I did do hot yoga up until 29 weeks in Tassie. And I'd been doing it long before that. I was just listening to my body. Once again, I knew what it was capable of. The instructors knew me. They knew that I was listening to myself. So again, building those connections and relationships was really valuable. And yeah, that brings me up to 35 weeks. Then we plan to go back to Australia in preparation to have Violet, and wanted to sit a Vipassana course. And as I said, Gav and I, well, whenever I've done one, I've been with Gav. And then they were starting to kind of say, we don't recommend you do this. Why don't you do it at separate times? And we're like, look, I'm about to have a baby. This is the best timing. We're not interested in talking to one another. We really value what we get out of it, but we would love to do this together. So booked in for that in Melbourne and saw another pregnant lady. And we had the same second midwife because you need to have 2 midwives when you have a home birth in Australia. I never actually met her, which is a good thing, because I already knew that I didn't want to have people in the space with me. I didn't know if I was going to have a water birth. My parents had a spa in the bathroom, or if it was just going to be in a bedroom. I didn't know where we were going to have the baby, but we had the options. But I did say that I only wanted Gav in the room. I'll talk a little bit more about this when I talk in part 3 about her birth, Violet's birth. But I ended up having the midwife there as well. But I never met the second one, which is good. She just sat on the couch and knitted. Because why was it good? Because she was only ever needed if there was an emergency. So I've only ever spoken to her on the phone, and that's it, to say thank you. So yeah, this other lady had the second midwife. We were due around the same time. I was like, don't worry, my baby's coming earlier. And sitting Vipassana whilst pregnant was amazing. I often say, if you've got any excuses about not being able to eat because your last meal is usually 11 a.m., it's when you go pregnant, they let you eat whenever you want. When I did my 3-day Vipassana at 16 weeks pregnant, I overate because the food is beautiful, but I just overate. I never dropped into a good space, whatever the space was. It wasn't a pleasant experience. It was too uncomfortable. It was too sleepy to meditate. So when I went back to do the 10 days, I would actually just have fruit in between, and just before bedtime I would have toast with Vegemite on it, really nice sourdough before bed to kind of get me through to the next morning. And I think I would have something to eat first thing in the morning before going into the first morning sit, like just some nuts or something like that. And that worked really well for me. So again, trial and error, finding my rhythm. But I do remember it was a really amazing experience, even though I had all this time off and we were being quite active in New Zealand, is that I felt like I got really in tune with my baby. I didn't know that Violet was a Violet or a girl at that time. I had people tell me it's either a really feminine boy or a very robust girl. Turns out she's a robust girl. I just got to connect with her and feel into my body, just turn things down another notch. Is we live in this crazy masculine-driven do world. And yeah, if you haven't guessed it yet, I do love Vipassana. I haven't actually done one since Violet was born. I'll talk a little bit about how I practiced Vipassana when she was born later in part 3. But it was an amazing experience, and I'm very grateful that I've been able to share this with some of my pregnant clients and that they have gone off and they have sat Vipassana whilst they are pregnant. And yeah, it's gotten them through some challenging challenging experiences during their birth, but they've stayed very grounded in their body. Hypnobirthing has been able to help some of these clients, as not these same clients, but help some clients. But I really feel like Vipassana takes it to the next level. And it's so much learning, not just about pregnancy and birth. So that was a really amazing experience. And I loved that I could eat whenever I wanted. That really helped. So this is just a message for you. If you come up with excuses for Vipassana, I'll find a reason for you. Anyway, you get to lead yourself into that space when you feel ready. And then, yeah, we would just cruise around home. I don't think Gav was doing any work at this point in time. It was a plan for him to work after Violet was born. I don't know what we had discussed, but as I said, 6 months was a little bit long. And yeah, we'd just go for walks. We were just in cruise mode, really. And we connected with another one of our midwives clients. That was really beautiful. We don't actually keep in contact anymore, but that was cool, just to find people who are in alignment, same way of thinking. Gav and I were okay being in our little bubble. And then I had my 3 friends, Bridget, Emma, and Lisa over in Australia. They're my high school friends. And I remember the day I woke up in the morning and I could feel my waters leaking. So this was the morning of September 30th. Yep, September 30th. And it was so funny because my dad had chickens and they hadn't laid eggs yet. And my mum said, wouldn't it be funny if like the first chicken that lays its egg is when you have your baby? And that morning, the chicken laid its first egg. So yeah, my waters had broken. It wasn't like in the movies where it was a bit gush, but it's like, oh, am I peeing my pants here? But then it would come in waves. And that's where I was like, well, there's obviously contractions happening, but I'm not feeling any pain. So we still like walked about, and there was this really nice orange tree at a playground and a reserve at the bottom of the street, and we would often go and pick oranges. On this day in the afternoon, we decided to go down to the orange tree. So September 30th, springtime. And then the lady next door, whose orange tree it was, even though it was in a public reserve, yelled at us. She's like, get away from my orange tree. I'm like, oh gosh, this is quite stressful. Anyway, it used to be her orange tree before it became council land. And anyway, she didn't want to share her oranges. So we gave her what we had picked and we walked back home. I was really addicted to oranges, actually. I was eating like 5 a day. I don't know what that was, but I would honor any cravings that I had. I never had anything weird and wonderful. As I said, I was vegan throughout the pregnancy, but now I recall, I think I asked Gavin to go down to the supermarket one night to get bacon and fry up some bacon. Anyway, oranges. I ate lots of oranges. Don't know what was in that. And could still feel like water's kind of coming out. And then we were watching a Michelle Odent, that male French obstetrician, and then lying on the couch and heard an audible pop, and Gav heard that as well. And then I felt more come out. Still not like the movies, like gushing out, but it's like, oh, this is happening. And then we just had dinner, not feeling much. I remember kind of withholding from my mum and dad, because I never wanted people saying, when's the baby due? Are you in labour? And like checking, and always feeling like I had to meet someone else's expectations. So I didn't tell my mum until later that like, oh, hey, my waters have broken. But don't say anything. Like, just, we'll let you know if we need to. We've called Martina and let her know. And then I got into the evening, and it wasn't until 9 o'clock. What movie were we watching? It was something with Chris Hemsworth in. in it. It was like the one where he was a racing car driver, but that's the movie that we were watching. And then at around 9 or 10, it's like, oh, and I had Gav. I think I'm going to transition into part 3 in a minute, but I didn't want to be made aware of times. So Gav was noticing when I'd have surges or contractions. I didn't mind calling them contractions. I know you don't call them that in hypnobirthing, waves, surges. He would document how far apart they were. And it got to a point where it was like, this is kind of uncomfortable. Like, I can't focus on the movie anymore. And so I went into Vipassana meditation. And I was okay with that. And it was like, this is sensation, this is sensation. And then I couldn't control like the moans and the groans and having to move. So again, of like being strict, instead of being strict and like, I must sit in Vipassana meditation and observe sensation, it's like, I've got to move. So I did that. And I just honored everything that my body wanted. And then we kind of move into 10 or 11 o'clock. And this is where I'm going to cut this episode abruptly, because I know before I start talking about part 3, I have recurrently found this little piece of paper that was a piece of paper that Gav was writing down on, because I wanted to be completely unaware of time and how long things had happened for. So, yeah, got to that point, called the midwife to say things are happening. And let me leave part 2 about the pregnancy here, and I will roll into part 3 another time. So I hope you've enjoyed this. Remember, this is a 3-part series, and I recommend that, you listen to them in order. You're at the end of this one anyway. And also the podcast called Can You Do Emotional Work During Pregnancy? And also my Vipassana experience, which I recorded quite a few months ago. So I might have shared a few different things around that. So I hope you have enjoyed.